At the end of 2024, the United States had zero factory capacity for the lithium ion phosphate cells that grid-scale batteries require. But yesterday, industry data confirmed the country can now supply its entire annual storage demand from domestic factories with surplus capacity on the way. 18 months from nothing to self-sufficiency. That is the tempo we're living in now. And that manufacturing story is just the opening act of a day that includes a potential blood test for the deadliest common cancer, a new way to fight Alzheimer's that the field almost couldn't see, and a $29 billion coding company that got caught building its flagship product on a foundation it didn't really want to talk about. So how the United States built its own supply chain for batteries while you weren't looking. Let me give you the numbers because the numbers are really where it gets real. At the close of 2024, the U.S. had effectively no domestic production of the battery cells designed for grid storage. But by the end of 2025, 20 gigawatt hours had come online. And by December of this year, the industry is on pace to hit 96 gigawatt hours. The country only needs about 60 to cover everything developers plan to install annually. So we're not just catching up, we're overshooting. LG Energy Solution Vertec tells the story in miniature. Their plant in Holland, Michigan started at 4 gigawatt hours last summer. It expanded to 16.5, and they're targeting 50 gigawatt hours across North America this year. The company's chief product officer said if someone had described this trajectory to him a decade ago, he wouldn't have believed it, and I don't blame him. Now, here's why this matters beyond just manufacturing statistics. Batteries accounted for 28% of all the new U.S. power plant capacity built this year. Not solar and not wind, certainly not gas. Batteries. And if you've been following the AI compute story, the data centers, the power demands, the transmission line bottlenecks, this arrives at exactly the right moment. Data centers need power that can be deployed faster than new transmission lines can be approved. Grid batteries assembled domestically are that power. And the way this happened, that's the part I keep coming back to. The Inflation Reduction Act created incentives for battery manufacturing. And then a new administration came in, kept the manufacturing incentives, but pulled the EV purchase credits. So the EV market softened. So manufacturers who built factory capacity for electric vehicle batteries pivoted to grid storage, where demand was exploding. And what looked like a policy setback for electrification became instead a catalyst for grid transformation. GM and LG Energy Solution announced just 4 days ago they're retooling their Spring Hill, Tennessee plant from EV cells to grid-scale lithium iron phosphate chemistry. The system found a path the planners didn't draw. The upstream supply chain is still the gap. China dominates the refined materials that feeds these cells, but the finished product threshold, that's been crossed. And in Ann Arbor, Michigan, something is happening that takes this logic down to block level. Ann Arbor opened enrollment yesterday for the first city-owned sustainable energy utility in the country. Voters approved it 80% in 2024. The city installs and owns solar panels and battery systems at participating homes and buildings. You opt in, you get 2 utility bills, one for city-owned clean energy and one for whatever residual grid power you still need. And the projection is you pay less total than your current single bill. More than 1,500 residents have already indicated interest, and the city directed first enrollment toward Bryant, which is a neighborhood where a quarter of residents spend more than a third of their income on utilities. That's the design choice that elevates this beyond a pilot program. The structural problem with residential solar has always been that the people who need energy savings most, renters, low-income homeowners, can't afford the upfront investment. Ann Arbor erases the upfront cost entirely. The city finances installation and recovers costs through these monthly charges. If this model works at scale, then every mid-sized city in America can replicate it without waiting for federal legislation or utility cooperation. All right, let's shift to another story here. I need to talk about pancreatic cancer for a minute because what came out yesterday could eventually change how we find it. Pancreatic cancer has a 5-year survival rate of about 12%. And that's not because we're not able to treat it, although treatment is hard, but it's because we never find it early enough. By the time symptoms appear, the cancer has usually spread, and there's no standard screening test, no mammogram equivalent, for example, no colonoscopy equivalent. But if your doctor found your pancreatic cancer early, it was probably an accident, an imaging study ordered for something completely unrelated. Yesterday, NIH-supported researchers published results of a 4-marker blood test that detected pancreatic cancer in over 90% of cases, including 87.5% of early-stage tumors, the ones that are almost invisible to everything else that we currently have. The test combines 4 biomarkers, 2 proteins that were already known, CA19-9 and THBS2, plus 2 new additions, ANPEP and PIGR. The combination there, that's what matters. No single marker catches enough, but together they hit over 91% accuracy with a 5% false positive rate. Let me make this personal. If your family has a history of pancreatic cancer, the idea that a blood draw at your annual physical could flag this cancer before it spreads is not a small thing. It's potentially the difference between a survivable surgery and a terminal diagnosis. Now, this is still in retrospective validation. It needs prospective trials. It needs to be tested in real screening populations, but the signal, 90% detection, including early stage, that's the kind of signal that launches those trials. All right, let's shift again over to Alzheimer's this time. This is an Alzheimer's finding from Heidelberg. There have been a lot of Alzheimer's stories that we covered, and I don't want to just continue to add another one to the pile without telling you why this one is different. For decades, the dominant theory of Alzheimer's has been amyloid plaques build up, they kill neurons, that's the disease. Billions of dollars of drug development went after amyloid, and most of it failed. The drugs that do target amyloid, like lecanemab and donanemab, show modest benefit and significant side effects, so the field has been stuck. What the Heidelberg team found, though, is a mechanism that operates downstream of amyloid, a toxic partnership between 2 proteins, NMDA receptors and TRPM4, that forms at elevated levels in Alzheimer's patients' brains. So when TRPM4 binds to NMDA receptors outside the synapses, it converts normally protective signaling machinery into what the researchers call a death complex. It literally flips a switch on the neuron's own equipment, turning survival signals into kill signals. Their compound, FP802, wedges itself into the interface where those 2 proteins connect and breaks that partnership. In mice, it preserved learning and memory, reduced synaptic loss, protected mitochondrial function, and here's the really surprising finding, also reduced amyloid buildup, even though it doesn't target amyloid at all. The implication is that there's a feedback loop here. Neuronal damage from the death complex promotes further amyloid formulation, which promotes more death complex formulation. FP802 interrupts that loop by hitting the downstream mechanism instead of the upstream plaque. This is the 5th distinct Alzheimer's intervention approach that the Century Report has documented in March alone. UCLA found an intracellular tau cleanup system on March 4th. INSERM identified an extracellular clearance pathway on the 9th. Scripps built a protein folding blood diagnostic on the 12th. Barcelona's FLAV27 reversed cognitive decline through epigenetic reprogramming on the 15th without touching amyloid. Now, Heidelberg identifies a druggable death mechanism that also operates independently of amyloid. What's happening here is not obviously a single breakthrough, something far more important. The therapeutic design space for Alzheimer's is expanding. For years, the field had essentially one door, amyloid, and it kept throwing itself against it. But now there are 5 doors, 6 more opening. Not every one will lead to an effective drug, but the probability that none of them does is shrinking with every new mechanism identified. For the 40-some million people living with Alzheimer's globally, and for everyone who loves those people, the shape of the search has fundamentally changed. All right, different kind of story now, but this one is about provenance and honesty, and the weird space between how AI actually gets built and how companies describe that. Cursor is a coding tool. It's valued at $29.3 billion. It recently crossed $2 billion in annualized revenue. Its new flagship model, Composer 2, was getting attention for strong benchmark performance and dramatically lower cost. Then community members found Kimi identifiers buried in the code. Kimi 2.5 is an open source model from Moonshot AI, a Chinese company. Cursor had built Composer 2 on top of it, applied continued pre-training and reinforcement learning that consumed roughly 3/4 of the total compute, and then released the result without mentioning the base model. When confronted, Cursor's co-founder called it a miss. Now, the use itself was completely legitimate. Moonshot confirmed an authorized commercial partnership through the inference platform Fireworks AI. Open source models exist to be built upon. Cursor added substantial value on top of that open source model. This system works. This is the open source ecosystem functioning exactly as designed. So why didn't they mention it? Well, you probably already know the answer. It's because in the current geopolitical narrative, a $29 billion American AI company admitting that its flagship model runs on a Chinese foundation is awkward. It's not illegal, it's not unethical, but it's awkward. And that gap between how intelligence systems are actually built and how their construction is discussed publicly, that's what this story is really about. The open source ecosystem does not care about borders. Capability compounds wherever good work gets shared. Kimi K2.5 was released openly. Cursor built meaningfully on top of it, as they were supposed to. That's how this works. The result exceeded what either could have produced on their own. That's the point of open source. I cannot say that enough. But the narrative of national AI competition, the framework that says American AI and Chinese AI are in a zero-sum race, that treats that kind of cross-pollination as something to hide. And as long as that narrative holds, companies will keep building on global foundations while pretending they didn't. The Cursor incident makes the contradiction visible, but that will not be the last time. Just days ago, we covered OpenAI releasing GPT 5.4 Mini alongside Minimax's self-evolving M2.7 model, capability compounding across open and closed ecosystems. Simultaneously, Cursor's disclosure confirms the same dynamic at the commercial product layer. The systems don't recognize the borders the politics insist on. And that, my friends, is the way of the future, and as it should be. All right, let's talk a little bit about what shipped today. Quick hits, just real quick. Cisco launched Defense Claw at RSA Conference, which is an open source framework that automates security hardening specifically for AI agents. So if you're deploying AI systems that take actions on their own, this gives security teams a way to inventory that and lock down what those agents can access. Cisco also released AI Defense Explorer Edition, which is a self-serve tool for developers to stress test their AI models against adversarial attacks before deployment. Also, Evermind AI opened Memory Sparse Attention, which is a framework that lets language models scale to 100 million tokens of memory with under 9% degradation. So to put that in perspective, 100 million tokens is roughly 75 million words. That's more than every book most people will read in a lifetime, accessible in a single context window. So the memory ceiling just moved, and dramatically. Here's what I'd like you to carry out today. 18 months ago, the U.S. couldn't make a single grid battery cell. Yesterday, it crossed self-sufficiency. A 4-marker blood test just caught 90% of pancreatic cancers, the disease defined by how late we find it. A team in Heidelberg found a kill switch in Alzheimer's neurons that decades of amyloid-focused research structurally couldn't see because they were looking upstream. The thing these things share is not a theme, it's a tempo. The distance between we can't do this and this is done is compressing in every domain simultaneously. Manufacturing, diagnostics, neurodegeneration, the tools we build intelligence with. And Tuesday, a federal courtroom in Northern California will test whether safety commitments embedded in an AI system's design can survive contact with institutional power. That ruling shapes whether these systems that reach deployment carry values or arrive empty. So very soon, watch for that preliminary injunction hearing. Watch for whether Ann Arbor's enrollment numbers hold, and watch for what happens when other cities see that an 80% voter mandate and a city-owned utility can put solar on rooftops in neighborhoods that never had that access before. The model doesn't need permission to replicate. We'll see you tomorrow.